status quo ante to the position that it was in April this year. And India would want this to happen through talks in a peaceful and cordial atmosphere, in a step-by-step and a verifiable manner. But having said that, the military guard is in no way down, because as you know, you get diplomatic heft only when you have military strength on the ground. Preeti?
All right, Amrit, that was one part of it. Now, also we've seen India has raised its concern over China's investments in Pakistan-administered Kashmir, as we see that India has voiced objection to the Daimir Basha multi-purpose dam. Also, what do you make of the, how are events evolving on that side? How do you read the unfolding of the events?
So the MEA reacted by saying that the construction of dam and altering of the territorial or physical realities in the territory, which is Indian territory, but in illegal occupation of Pakistan, referring to the building of that dam in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, clearly taking objection to it. And India has time and again taken objection to, say, the CPEC, the BRI, saying that these are projects which affect the territory and violate the territorial integrity of India, because they pass through illegally occupied Indian territory, and you are altering the status quo, you're altering the physical conditions there, and India will oppose this tooth and nail at every fora. And the statement or the reaction by the Ministry of External Affairs yesterday to the building of the dam is keeping in line with the consistent reaction or opposition of India to, as I said, the CPEC projects,
yes,
the BRI initiative, which India has not joined and has opposed completely. So that is in line with that. Preeti?
All right, Amrit, thank you for joining us with those. Concludes his visit in eastern Ladakh. He will head towards Srinagar for talks with the Lieutenant General there, the Lieutenant Governor there, also to assess the situation at the LOC. At present, we see Defence Minister at eastern Ladakh, and Ramesh, our correspondent, is present there. Ramesh, we see that the demonstration has ended. Let us know what next is up the agenda for the Defence Minister in eastern Ladakh.
Yeah, now the demonstration here at Rambirpur is over now. Defence Minister is about to take off for Lukung, where he'll be reaching to Pangangsu, where he'll be addressing the armed forces and paramilitary forces at Lukung Post, which is the forward post in the eastern Ladakh region, and which is just opposite to the one of the friction points right now in discussion, that is Singapore at Pangangsu. From any moment from now, Rajnath Singh, Defence Minister, will be leaving for Lukung from Leh.
All right. Lukung is a combined post where the Indian Army and the Indo-Tibetan Border Police are stationed. Ramesh, in a while from now, we will see Defence Minister address the troops and the soldiers, the forces who are stationed at the LAC. Very quickly, for the knowledge of our viewers who joined us late, give us a gist of the demonstration which we just witnessed.
See, this demonstration, which was witnessed by the Defence Minister and CDS Bipin Rawat, General Bipin Rawat, and Chief of Army Staff M.M. Naravane, this is the coordination and the communications between the Indian Air Force and Indian Army at any given situation, how well coordinated and well-oiled machinery that works in a country's defense, and to support the ground staff at forward post. Now, we have witnessed here at Rambirpur in Leh the paratrooping of how the paratroopers can be injected in enemy territory in when requirement is arises, and how they can go and do the job done for the country. And the other thing we have seen is the slithering, where we need not to remind how army can go and do the job in places in occupied Kashmir. We have seen in a couple of years ago. These are all the techniques which Indian Army and Air Force or Navy, for that matter, this is the coordinated effort only now can secure the country sovereignty. This is how they practice this coordination at time to time to test their preparedness and to test their communications, how communications reach to each other and each other forces, because these three are different forces and three are different languages, but the commitment is same: protect the country at any cost. And for that, they can do any heroics and any adventures like we have seen here, paratrooping from such a height, and they drop at precisely at the given place, and this is how the coordinated efforts of tri-forces protect the country. Now Rajnath Singh ji is leaving for Lukung. He is leaving the venue at Ranbirpur now, and he will be taking chopper from at the place where he landed here.
Yes, and at Lukung, the
yeah.
defense minister will address the troops, the soldiers stationed there. Here we see him leave the venue after witnessing the demonstration, the joint demonstration, collaborated and coordinated demonstration between the Indian Air Force and the Indian Army in Eastern Ladakh. This is Defence Minister's first visit to Eastern Ladakh after India-China standoff, and also we saw Prime Minister visited Eastern Ladakh some 2 weeks back, and that also was indeed a morale booster for the forces who were stationed in these difficult, prohibiting climatic conditions, in these climatic conditions, who are stationed at the LAC. And also we saw the Prime Minister in clear, stern words vehemently saying that India will reply back to any misadventure by any country, and this is not the era of military expansionism, I beg your pardon. And from here, the Defence Minister is headed towards Lukung, and there he will address the troops who are stationed at the post along the LAC. Also, after the Defence Minister concludes his visit from Eastern Ladakh, he will be heading towards Jammu and Kashmir, where he will also take stock of the preparedness at the LOC. And he will be also holding discussions and interactions with the LG in Jammu and Kashmir. So that was the gist of the Defence Minister's visit till now in Eastern Ladakh. And as we told you, this is the first visit of the Defence Minister to Eastern Ladakh after the standoff between India and China. But at the same time, we also tell you that this visit comes in the backdrop of the marathon talks, almost of 15 hours, which happened between both the sides, talking of and materializing the second phase of disengagement, which is happening at the LAC. And these talks were held on the 14th of this month at Chushul. And put all these things together, Defence Minister's visit is indeed crucial. And we also had our reporters joining us from Eastern Ladakh, and also our correspondent covering external affairs, both spelling out the importance and the significance of this visit. So as of now, that's it in this edition of the news. We'll keep track of the ongoings there. And all right, before we leave, we'll get to these visuals coming in again from Eastern Ladakh. We have Defence Minister Rajnath Singh in Eastern Ladakh, and our correspondent Ramesh is also there. Ramesh, let us know more about what we are seeing on our screens right now.
Yeah, Defence Minister, before he is leaving for Lukung, again he unscheduledly stopped himself, and he could not resist himself to stop at tankers, and he is interacting with the tanker troops, and you can see on screen how they are enthused. This is what actually the visit makes difference in armed forces at the forward post. So how quickly they are reaching to the minister, and this is how they get motivated when they see the minister, the political leaders, how they are encouraging and how they are standing, and behind them, how the entire country is standing with the army people at the toughest terrain conditions and climatic conditions when they are serving the
Yes,
country.
indeed. This is what
And
the Prime
entire-
Minister also said, how the entire nation is thankful for the services of our armed forces who are stationed at different borders and are protecting our country, are protecting the common people and the sovereignty of the country. Now, you're talking of the morale booster, Ramesh. Definitely, it indeed is for the soldiers who are away from their families, who are giving out their services at such tough terrains, difficult climatic conditions, and also you also spoke of how difficult the areas are when we talk of the topographical details of the areas where these troops are stationed. And at present, Defence Minister Rajnath Singh is on his way to Lukung Post, where he will address the soldiers who are stationed there. He will address the troops there. Just a while back, before leaving for Lukung, here we had him have the group photograph, the photo op happening with the troops, where the joint exercise between the army and the Indian force happened. At present, or rather in a short while from now, the Defence Minister will reach Lukung Post, and there he will address the soldiers. We'll keep you updated. As of now, that's it in this edition of the News This Hour. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Pandemics are not new and have increased by nearly 4 times over the past century. So what's leading to the emergence of pandemics? And are we creating a fertile ground for outbreaks to turn into pandemics? The answer could lie in cross-species transmission as a result of changing resource landscapes, deforestation, pouring into forest land, greater population density, globalization, greater animal-human contact in wet markets, climate change and connectivity, leading the virus to spread from one part of the world to another. These factors may have triggered outbreaks, and international travel may have facilitated the escalation of these outbreaks into pandemics. One such pandemic was swine flu. It surfaced in 2009 and has since seen several outbreaks.
2009 to 2010, swine flu, deaths 1,51,700 to 5,75,400, cause influenza A H1N1 virus. The 2009 swine flu pandemic was caused by a new strain of H1N1 that originated in Mexico in the spring of 2009, before spreading to the rest of the world. This virus was originally referred to as swine flu because laboratory testing showed its gene segments were similar to influenza viruses that were most recently identified in and known to circulate among pigs. This virus is believed to have resulted from reassortment, a process through which 2 or more influenza viruses can swap genetic information by infecting a single human or animal host. In 1 year, the virus infected as many as 1.4 billion people across the globe and killed about 11 to 21% of the global population. On 11th June 2009, the World Health Organization declared that the world is at the start of a pandemic. In India, the first case of influenza A H1N1 was reported on the 16th of May 2009 from Hyderabad, when a 23-year-old Indian carried the virus from New York to the southern India city. Swine flu's symptoms were fever, cough, sore throat, runny or stuffy nose, body aches, headache, chills and fatigue. Some people exhibited symptoms of vomiting and diarrhea. Most of those infected by swine flu were children and young adults, with older people immune to it already.
Even though it was well known that the influenza or swine flu or H1N1 primarily affected some sections of the society, like women who are pregnant, children, people who had comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, obesity. These people were more affected, and the mortality or deaths have occurred more in that section of the society. And I feel these people were vulnerable that time. Even today, if you look at the COVID-19, we find some sections of our society are more prone to acquire infection and also get complicated or land into complications and sometimes results into the death.
The pandemic began to taper off in November 2009, and by May 2010, the number of cases were in steep decline. On 10th August 2010, WHO announced the end of the H1N1 pandemic.
I feel that was an indication that such pandemics which had occurred in past are not going to be an exceptional situation, but likely to come in future too. And then somehow comparatively world managed it not so effectively, but with the number of people, number of cases, number of deaths, that was somehow managed by the world. But even after 4 or 5 years, the cases were occurring in different parts of the world, including our own country. Even though the pandemic was over, the influenza became a kind of a seasonal influenza, and now H1N1 is one of those strains which are not called as a swine flu, but influenza or the seasonal influenza.
In April 2020, the WHO drew a comparison between swine flu and COVID-19 to underscore the severity of COVID-19.
We know that COVID-19 spreads fast, and we know that it's deadly, 10 times deadlier than the 2009 flu pandemic.
Chinese researchers discovered a new type of swine flu that can infect humans and has the potential to cause a future pandemic. Though scientists have cautioned that the virus does not pose an immediate global health threat.
This newer variety of swine flu or H1N1 has been there in China in more than last couple of years, and thus it is known to the public health agencies and authorities, and I am pretty certain that the measures are being planned. So we need not get unduly worried, but the fact remains that such epidemics or pandemic, we should ensure that it doesn't become pandemic and it doesn't affect the total globe, or it doesn't even affect the countries. That need that really reflects the real need of developing public health systems.
The disease, which researchers called the G4 virus, genetically descended from the H1N1 swine flu that caused a pandemic in 2009. Chinese researchers discovered the G4 virus during a pig surveillance program. From 2011 to 2018, they collected more than 30,000 nasal swab samples from pigs in slaughterhouses and veterinary teaching hospitals across 10 Chinese provinces. From these samples, researchers identified 179 swine influenza viruses, including the G4 virus. After 2009, the H1N1 virus in humans spread back into pigs around the world, and the genes mixed into new combinations, creating new viruses like G4.
We need to establish a system of appropriate surveillance, detecting earliest at the earliest clusters, ensuring that preventive measures are put into place much before the epidemic starts spreading, ensuring that the primary preventive measures such as developing vaccines and safe drugs or the drugs which can cure such viral diseases or bacterial diseases need to be concurrently evolved, so that less and less number of people are affected. We cannot totally stop human animal interaction, but we can definitely prevent human animal transmission of diseases. If the disease that occurs in an animal cycle, if it remains in that particular cycle and does not jump the species, then the chances of such pandemics resulting into disasters of the present nature can be definitely achieved.
The pandemic that followed swine flu was novel coronavirus. Coronaviruses are a large family of viruses that usually cause mild to moderate upper respiratory tract illnesses like common cold. Coronaviruses are adorned by spikes on their surface, giving them a crown-like appearance. And corona is a Latin word that means crown. That explains the nomenclature of coronavirus. 3 new coronaviruses have emerged from animal reservoirs over the past 2 decades to cause serious widespread illness and death. SARS was the first among the 3. COVID-19 marks the return of a very old and familiar enemy. While the SARS virus killed about 10% of all infected individuals, the MERS outbreak identified in 2012 had a fatality rate of around 35%.
2019 to date, COVID-19 caused SARS-CoV-2 virus. The COVID-19 outbreak was caused by a mutated coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2. As per official communication by Chinese authorities, the central Chinese city of Wuhan was ground zero for the novel coronavirus. China claims the virus emerged in December 2019. The virus spread like wildfire beyond China and took a heavy global toll within months. Comparisons are often drawn between COVID-19, SARS and MERS. SARS, or Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, was the first emerging epidemic of the 21st century. First cases of SARS emerged in mid-November 2002 in Guangdong province of China. It was first identified in Vietnam on 28 February 2002 when Dr. Carlo Urbani, an epidemiologist from the WHO office in Hanoi, examined a patient with a severe form of pneumonia with no known cause.
This particular infection is assumed to have come from animals such as either civet or bats of a different kind. The typical feature of this infection is when this infection took toll of almost 3,500 odd Chinese people, not many outside knew that this particular infection is occurring in China. But it was just that there was a businessman, US businessman, who was traveling to China and he was traveling back to US. So he was in a flight back, and then he developed suddenly this infection which causes pneumonitis like symptoms also in the flight itself. The result was people were worried, so they went to Hanoi instead of their intended place. And in Hanoi, interestingly, there was an Italian doctor who was visiting the hospital and who saw this particular patient, and he realized that this is a different kind of illness, and therefore he reported to WHO that I think this is a different infection itself.
At the end of the epidemic in June 2003, SARS-CoV had infected 8,422 people. There was no second wave of SARS. SARS was spread by close person-to-person contact, most readily by respiratory droplets. Symptoms of the disease included high fever, headache, an overall feeling of discomfort, body aches, sometimes diarrhea, a dry cough after 2 to 7 days, and pneumonia. Severe cases often evolved rapidly to respiratory distress and required intensive care.
SARS had a case fatality rate of 11%, which essentially means if there are 100 people who acquired SARS infection, 11 of them used to succumb to this infection. This was a droplet infection, and when it is a droplet infection, you had the preventive measures of using mask, safe distancing, and then washing your hands before you touch your nose and face. Coughing and sneezing or cough etiquettes have to be followed, and they were expected to be followed. The result, SARS came in very small numbers to India. There were only 3 patients who were seen at the time of SARS in India, and the infection died down by itself. But perhaps it died down mainly because we adopted stringent measures at that particular time, which are the measures which we are already prescribing even for COVID-19.
Another mutation of coronavirus resulted in MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, a viral respiratory disease first identified in Saudi Arabia in 2012.
This occurred in Gulf countries when they came in contact with camels, because camel is considered as one of those reservoirs from where this virus has also jumped. Both the viruses, the SARS virus as well as MERS virus, belong to the family of coronaviruses. They are called as MERS-CoV and SARS virus, which is also a coronavirus.
Humans were infected through direct or indirect contact with infected dromedary camels. While some cases were asymptomatic, typical MERS symptoms were fever, cough, and shortness of breath. Pneumonia was common but not always present. Gastrointestinal symptoms including diarrhea were reported too. Like in the case of COVID-19, the virus caused more severe disease in older people, those with weakened immune systems, and those with chronic diseases.
MERS had a very high fatality rate, close to about, if there are 100 people with MERS, 35 of them, they would die due to this infection. But interestingly, this infection was slightly different. This infection was not so easily transmissible from one human being to other. So it came rapidly from camel to human being, but its movement from man to man or human to human transmission was pretty less. The result was MERS tended to occur periodically, but MERS, numbers of people who actually had MERS continued to remain small, and they remain restricted in Gulf. Whenever it occurs, the traditional measures are again prescribed, the same safe distancing, the same cough etiquettes, the hygiene related issues, they are expected to be followed.
In the first few months of 2020, COVID-19 spread quickly across the globe, reaching 10 million confirmed cases towards the end of June.
As China managed to contain it very quickly, despite the fact that perhaps it may have had started little earlier in China than is reported, but the containment measures were strong and they could manage to contain that. But by then it had already got transmitted into different countries, and today what you see is a pandemic.
On 11th March 2020, WHO had declared COVID-19 as a pandemic. Europe and North America saw the first major outbreaks in April 2020, but as they began to ease, Latin America and Asia started seeing an increase in cases. The virus infects lung cells, leading to respiratory failure.
This virus is slightly different. It also comes from coronaviruses. All these viruses don't have an effective vaccine as of now, whether it is SARS, whether it is MERS-CoV. Both the diseases don't have right kind of effective treatment is not available for all the coronavirus infections as of now. However, this particular COVID-19 has certain unusual features that it is highly transmissible from human being to another human being. The result is today you are counting the numbers of those who are infected in millions.
After being seen as an infection spread by respiratory droplets for months, WHO acknowledged emerging evidence of the airborne spread of novel coronavirus after a group of scientists urged it to update its guidance on how the disease spread between people.
We acknowledge that there is emerging evidence in this field, as in all other fields, regarding the COVID-19 virus and pandemic. And therefore, we believe that we have to be open to this evidence and understand its implications regarding the modes of transmission and also regarding the precautions that need to be taken. Our group, together with the experts who are part of it, really highlighted the importance of research in the field of different transmission routes and in particular through droplets of different sizes and understanding really what is the relative importance of this. And also understanding the dose of the virus that is needed, in particular in this route of transmission that is the aerosol or airborne transmission.
After one of WHO's top scientists said that transmission of novel coronavirus by people who never developed symptoms was very rare, drawing widespread skepticism, the scientists came out with a clarification on asymptomatic carriers of the virus and onward transmission by them.
There are some estimates that suggest that anywhere between 6% of the population and 41% of the population may be infected but not have symptoms, within a point estimate of around 16%. I don't want to get too technical, but that we do know that some people who are asymptomatic or some people who don't have symptoms can transmit the virus on. And so what I was referring to yesterday in the press conference were a very few studies, some 2 or 3 studies that have been published that actually try to follow asymptomatic cases, so people who are infected over time, and then look at all of their contacts and see how many additional people were infected. And that's a very small subset of studies. And in that, I use the phrase very rare. And I think that that's misunderstanding to state that asymptomatic transmission globally is very rare. What I was referring to was a subset of studies.
There are claims and counterclaims on the origins of the virus that causes COVID-19. The narrative and counter-narrative have pitted global powers against each other. In May, the World Health Assembly, the WHO's top decision-making body, passed a resolution calling the agency to work with other international groups to identify the source of the virus and the route of introduction to the human population.
Knowing the source of the virus is very, very important. It's science, it's public health. We can fight the virus better when we know everything about the virus, including how it started.
The way coronavirus was studied was in the first SARS epidemic. Scientists went to the sites of origin of the epidemic in China, and they went to bat caves and markets and so on. And what they studied was they isolated this virus and they looked at how its gene sequence is, and they found something which is very interesting. What they found was bats incubate these kinds of viruses, and they are sort of an active laboratory for these viruses. And the reason for that is bats have an extraordinary high metabolism when they are flying. And as they're flying, they allow these viruses to replicate, but their own immune system contains the spread of the virus in a very effective manner, so they don't get affected. So that is the source. They mix and match and do things in a random way, and they invent keys without knowing what the lock is. And the lock is in our body, and the key is in the bat. And somehow, because they make millions of different kinds of keys, they make one random key which fits in the receptor, which is the lock in our cells. Now, normally we would never meet a bat unless we come in close proximity by living in bat caves, going to bat caves, or using wet markets. If we do that long enough, either from bats or other animals in such situations, and this one we think went from a bat to a pangolin to a human because of the gene sequence, the lock and key fit happens, and then the virus enters us and uses us as a host. So this is an incredible example of the way evolution by natural selection works. The key doesn't know of the existence of the lock, but it plays around with the lock and key in bats and in other animals, but it doesn't know that it fits beautifully with a human lock.